Okay, guys, let's go ahead and let's finish this 1920s out. So let's go ahead and start where we picked up last. So from here, let's look at the immigration quotas. I know the 1920s are seeming like they're a little bit jumbled, but to be honest with you, the 1920s is a time of just social, cultural, economic, and political chaos. A lot of it comes after the fact that we just finished World War I. And, while we were only involved in World War I for 1 year, 1917 to 1980, when the Treaty of what ended World War I? The Treaty of Versailles. After that time period, we really decided that it was our time to return to what we're going to actually see as a politician calling normalcy. But we returned to isolationism. We returned to ourselves. We returned to the fact that we just want to be Americans. And you're going to see that change from wartime to peacetime being part of the equation of the 1920s understanding. This right here, and I know y'all don't have it in your notes, but it just kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about as far as immigration goes in the 1920s. And I know this goes all the way to 1960, so it gives you an even better picture, but immigration after a war is going to be extremely touchy because you just fought a war against the Germans and the Hungarians and you get what I'm saying here? You just fought these people. Do you want them coming next door and living next door to you? Probably not. So after wartime, we always see some anti-immigrant sentiment. Nativism. Remember that word? Nativism. Say it. Nativism. That's the fear of immigration is going to happen again after the 1920s. You'll see in 1920 to 21 to 25, actually we had a pretty high immigration. Well, I guess kind of high. Total immigration during the 5 years. In thousands right here, 2,639,000, so actually about 2 million, but then you'll notice from 26 to 30, it goes down to 1.4, and then you go right there, oh, whoa, 1930, you have no immigration right here. You want to think about possibly why we would have no immigrants coming in 1930s. The Great Depression's happening then. Nobody can travel, and even if you wanted to travel, you wouldn't want to live here. So kind of interesting to look at there. But the one thing that we do need to look at as far as immigration, a massive star by this slide, is going to be these two laws of immigration policies during the 1920s. Go ahead and pause this, get these slides down, and then replay it. Okay, so Immigration Quota Act 1921 is going to state that 3%, circle that, of the total number of an ethnic group per year can come into the United States based on the 1910 census. And we remember what a census is, just a count of people. So according to the Immigration Quota Act of 1921, if there were 100,000 Germans in 1910 living in America, so 100,000 Germans, only 3% of 100,000 of that ethnic group, Germans, could come in per year. Remember Ellis Island, Angel Island, those immigration screening centers from the Gilded Age? So this literally means that if you had 100,000 Germans, 3% of 100,000, 3,000, okay, just easy math for you. That's all you could let into the United States of Germans per year. Once you hit 3,000, even if it's in the middle of a family, guys, you are no longer able to let any more Germans in, or Japanese, or Chinese, or anything like this that we're talking about, okay? So with this, the Emergency Quota Act is exactly what it says. Massive highlight of quota. It's a quota. We know what a quota is? Do you know what if I put a quota on something means? If you don't know what that means, out beside this slide, put quota equals limit. So this is the Emergency Limit Act, which limits the number of people per ethnic group based on the 1910 census. Now this one right here, next one, National Origins Act. Where do you originate or come from? 1924. 2% of the nationality living here in 1890. So we didn't just go from 1910 census. We went back to the 1890 census, and we didn't say 3%. We just said 2%. So it takes that limit, emergency quota, and it lowers it again. In 1929, the total number of immigrants also would be limited to 150,000 per year with the nationality allotment based on the 1920 census. So with that, guys, you are seeing some massive restrictions on immigration. Out beside this slide, I think you should put a big word that we've talked about for a long time. What is the fear of immigration? Nativism. Part of it is because we are fearful that they will take their jobs, but I'll be honest with you, that's more Gilded Age. The big picture here is that, I'm not kidding you, we are scared of immigrants after the war. Okay, so social and cultural conflicts. I know that this right here, it just says National Origin Act, kind of gives you a depiction. A percentage of population foreign born goes up, 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 up. Ooh, 19, about 14. You notice it goes boom, down like crazy. This is also another word I want you to make sure you circle right here. Xenophobia. I want you to make sure you know the definition of xenophobia. Make sure you know. If you got to look it up right now, pause it, Google it, xenophobia. Make sure you know it. Now, Red Scare. Red Scare, 1919 to 1921. Anytime you see this word red right here, I want you to circle it right here, put equals, and then put communist/anarchists. The Red Scare is going to be a time of great upheaval, and people are going to be freaking scared out of their wits during the 1920s because they're afraid that communists, anarchists, foreign-born radical agitators are coming to their home and going to get them. They're going to call this Red Scare a big, massive Red Scare. This will actually be the first Red Scare. We're going to have another Red Scare when we get to the Cold War because, communist scares Americans like crazy. But with that, the anti-red hysteria came after World War I, and I want you to make sure you underline this right here, the Russian Revolution. Big underline under Russian Revolution. Remember, if you got to pause this, pause it. Russian Revolution. We're also going to call this, you might want to make a little arrow out beside here, the Bolshevik Revolution. This is going to be one of the time periods where the change in power in Russia and the fact that they are now going to turn over to a communist nation after World War I is going to scare the bejibbers out of America. And when that communist upheaval and that anarchist upheaval is going to be spread sometimes into, a lot of people believe, labor unions in the United States, because labor unions want equality. Communism is a little bit about equality. It doesn't normally come out that way in reality, but it's supposed to be. Communist, communal, community. But this Red Scare is going to be something you need to know about. Now, the big thing right here you need to know, 6,000 immigrants in the government were suspected of being communists during this Red Scare, the first Red Scare. So this guy named, circle, Attorney General Mitchell Palmer right here. This is him right here. Basically like the head police officer, if you will, of the country, appointed by the President of the United States. He arrested those 6,000 immigrants, and at least 600 of them were deported and expelled from the U.S., but wait a second, with no due process, meaning they never got the chance to stand trial. And it says right here, literally, they were deported and expelled. No due process was followed. They were basically just kicked out on the suspicion of being communist. This is probably not going to be a good thing in our history, and it'll go down in the history books as, right here, highlight, Palmer raids. Think of it. Palmer raided the immigrants. One of the things in the 1920s having to do with xenophobia and the racial unrest and the social unrest. Communist International infiltrates the United States, 1919, to promote worldwide communism. This is going to lead to the Red Scare. Remember, red equals communism. The Palmer raids pops up in 1920. Here it is. Police arrest suspected Reds in Chicago. And this is Mitchell Palmer's house actually was bombed in 1920 because a lot of people thought he was racist, xenophobic, all kinds of stuff like that. So next up here. Pause it. Get this slide down. All right, let's talk about it. Now, with this Sacco and Vanzetti, now me just saying that, Sacco and Vanzetti, they're immigrants. Yes, anybody want to take a guess at what they were? There you go, Italians, Sacco and Vanzetti. Now, 2 shoe factory workers were murdered and robbed in one of the big cities in America. I do believe it was Chicago. And their basically company payroll was completely raided. All this goes down, and these 2 guys, Nicholas Sacco, a shoemaker, and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, a fish peddler, are arrested on flimsy evidence that somebody saw them in the area where the robbery and the murder took place. Now, there was no real evidence except for the fact that these guys were known anarchists and immigrants. And in class, I do believe if we have time, we're going to read Vanzetti's last statement. But basically, these guys were, bam, found guilty, sentenced to death, executed on what kind of evidence? Flimsy evidence. A lot of people are going to point to this case. And again, it's not so much about how the case went down or anything like that, but they're going to point to this case and they're going to say, hey, These guys shouldn't have had this happen to them, but because they were immigrants and anti-immigrant sentiments, they literally think these guys got basically screwed with their pants on because they were immigrants. And did they? Yeah, they kind of did. This led, you want why this is important, led to Congress changing immigration laws to make sure that we don't just take advantage of our immigrants and blame things on them. Here's just a picture, Sacco Vanzetti, and look at even right here, this cartoon's pretty good. Salem Witch Trials, 1692, Labor, Boston, 1927. He's offering up the chair for them to be killed in. Kind of interesting analogy. Now this one right here, I think this is probably going to just go again with it. Nativism, fear of immigration, fear of anything that's not peanut butter and jelly white America. The KKK. Birth of a Nation comes out in the 1920s. D.W. Griffith. The new Ku Klux Klan and Americanism comes out in the 1920s. In fact, there's going to be a parade in Washington, D.C. in 1926. Can you imagine this happening today? Well, today with Barack Obama president, that would really stir some stuff up. But you need to know that it's an aspect of nativism in the 1920s that the KKK comes in. Interesting fact, Woodrow Wilson, president in the 1918, 1917 time period when Birth of a Nation, that book right here was turned into a movie. They kind of screened in the White House the Birth of the Nation. Woodrow Wilson was a little bit racist. Oops. Urbanization of America, 1910 to 1930. You're going to start to see the urban population again growing. Basically, rural Americans identify with urban culture, more modern culture. Sex becomes a very, very big topic in the 1920s with the 19th Amendment with birth control, my women's, my flappers. The conflict comes out, traditional values versus new ideas found in the city.